The value of enterprise XR. I'm Tonya Hall, and joining me is Amy Peck, founder and CEO of EndeavorVR. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks so much, Tonya.
Tell us about EndeavorVR and tell us about your spatial computing background, if you will.
Yeah, so I started EndeavorVR in 2015 because I recognized that there was a real need in, especially industry and enterprise, to really understand spatial computing. And then it was more VR focused. And since our early days, we've got specialties now in AR and VR, as well as AI and blockchain. But I saw the value immediately in how enterprises could leverage VR, especially around training, because the military has been, doing training in simulations and virtual environments for decades. So there's, very clear data and ROI. And since then, we've really been looking at moving it just from training across multiple business units. So my belief is that there's no company on the planet that cannot improve process or training or even engage customers in a unique way using spatial computing.
When we talk about XR in the enterprise, what kind of data forms the foundation of an XR initiative?
That's a great question. It's a complex mesh. So one of the things that we do as a company and as consultants is I learned this the hard way, that the first thing that we need to do is not just do the discovery week and scoping, but we have to engage with C-suite, because nobody knows businesses better and the nuances of businesses, like the executives. And so what we do is we get as many of the C-suite and stakeholders in a room as possible. We tell them just generally about spatial computing. Then the most important component is to put them in headsets and in the AR glasses. And then we break everybody into groups and we do sort of a mini design thinking exercise. What that does is, it's interesting too, because we usually have 3 groups, and almost every time all 3 groups really get to the same point. But what we do is we assess all of the ways in which they believe, now that they have an understanding that immersive technology can be used. Then we prioritize based on where, our combined experience, where we understand they're going to get the best ROI. So while they may also land on, let's say, a consumer facing initiative, we have to be very clear that that is something that's a much longer play, whereas they also have a training initiative, or maybe they have remote design teams, that's where we're really going to be able to measure ROI. And we always recommend stacking the ROI with those early POCs, because it's going to be very difficult to get additional funding internally if we don't have early wins. And so it's really just sort of ranking the company imperatives around where we know they're going to get the best return on investment.
How do we curate and organize the data? Do we need data scientists, or can engineers and other business professionals handle the task?
It's typically, there's some machine learning elements. So we gain so much data in these virtual environments. So especially around training, there's 2 paths. So we're using, XAPI and SCORM data for education. And a lot of those data points we simply can push through the existing LMS mechanism. But a lot of this, very unwieldy, unstructured data and the eye tracking data, that is not suitable to go through, any kind of an LMS system or some of the existing ERPs. So there are companies that can help parse that data. And it really depends on how deeply the company has and what sort of fluency they have in terms of their own data science capabilities. A lot of companies don't have dedicated science teams. They're using analytics companies, outside analytics companies. So in that case, we would recommend one of the companies we work with, Cognitive 3D is one of our partners. They're phenomenal. So they can measure eye tracking, they can measure efficacy. And the other piece is also just working with the development teams, because on the front end, there's a lot that we can do just by virtue of how we push someone through an experience, that we can measure exactly how well they did just by looking at the movement data and eye tracking and heat maps and so forth.
How does the data importance issue compare to problem solutions and user experience?
It's critical. User experience, the challenge we have now is we really haven't had enough users go through in aggregate a lot of these experiences. And so we're finding that individual companies are using some, mostly bespoke software, some off the shelf. And if they're doing testing, they're doing it with their own data sets, and they're not really deployed broadly. A huge deployment in VR might be 10,000 units right now. So when you compare that with mobile devices and laptops, it's really a statistically small number. So where I think we're going to start to hit an understanding of how we can leverage the user data, because I love that point you made. It's incredibly important for us to start using that data to make those experiences more user-friendly. And what are those natural interactions? But we need to start having it become a much more, much more ubiquitous in companies, where companies aren't so secretive about what they're doing, and they're using more and more off-the-shelf software, where that software company may have access to some blind interaction data in order to be able to improve the software and the user experience.
What recommendations can you offer related to data when an enterprise contemplates a spatial computing initiative?
Well, I think they should look at data in two buckets. One is the data that we're pulling from these virtual environments. And my recommendation, as expensive as it is record and hold everything, because the analytics piece is only going to improve. And as we get more and more data, and as more and more data becomes public, that data that they have recorded and maybe not parsed and is just being stored somewhere may be very relevant in the future. The second piece is that in virtual environments, both in AR and VR, data analytics in a 3D environment for me is a wide open playing field. And right now we're looking at data in somewhat 2D constructs in these 3D environments, and we haven't quite landed on the vernacular that will allow us to make truly sort of valid assessments leveraging data. But being able to parse massive amounts of data in 3D environments with different types of representations. I mean, you can go into a virtual environment, you can literally work with massive data sets from the inside out, leveraging the Z-axis. And I think we've barely scratched the surface of what the opportunity is there for working with data in virtual environments.
Amy Peck, founder and CEO of EndeavorVR. Thanks for joining us, Amy. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about the work that you're doing, how can they do that?
Yeah, please find me on LinkedIn, or of course on Twitter at virtualgirlny. And thank you so much, Tonya, for having me today.
Of course. And find more of my interviews right here or at tonyahall.net. Thanks for watching.